3 months ago, I was living in a 4.2 million home in the hills of California with my wife and our children. Today I'm standing alone, holding a letter that proves the life I believed in was built on lies, and that the woman who shattered me may have unknowingly saved my life. My name is Fletcher Morrison. I'm 47 years old. Until recently, I worked as a commercial insurance adjuster in Pasadena. I spent my days assessing other people's losses, helping them recover after disaster. From the outside, my life looked flawless. I was married to a beautiful woman named Cordelia. We had been together for 18 years. We had 2 children, Quinlan and Brenna, ages 16 and 14. They were brilliant, driven, and everything to me. Our home sat high above the city, offering a panoramic view of Los Angeles glowing at night like a sea of lights. I never questioned who I was or where I came from. I thought my identity was solid. I believed I was Fletcher Morrison, the son of Whifford Morrison, a quiet, hard-working librarian who raised me alone after my father died in a car accident when I was 12. I was told my father had been an ordinary construction worker who passed away too young, leaving my mother to raise me on a modest income in Ohio. We didn't have much, but she never let me feel deprived. She remembered every birthday, labeled photo albums by year, and made sure I did my homework and ate my vegetables. She held our small world together. Cordelia was my high school sweetheart. I was 17 when we met. She was 16. We fell in love with the intensity only teenagers can manage, reckless, pure, and all-consuming. She was ambitious and striking, the kind of woman who commanded attention without effort. After college, she built a successful career in real estate. Together, we spent years building a life piece by piece, milestone by milestone. Then came the kids. We moved to California chasing better opportunities. We bought the house people dream about. We enrolled Quinlan and Brenna in private schools. Quinlan grew into a standout athlete, 6'2", strong and confident. People said he was built like his grandfather, though I never really knew my father well enough to confirm that. He played varsity basketball, and colleges had already started watching him before he even hit his junior year. Brenna was different. She was the artist of the family. Much like my mother had been in her quiet way, she could capture emotion on paper in a way that stopped people cold. She noticed details others overlooked. For 47 years, this was my life. This was my story. A family man, a professional, a kid from Ohio who made it big in California. I had no reason to doubt any of it. Then slowly everything began to unravel. About 18 months ago, it started with small changes. Cordelia began taking phone calls outside. She stayed out later, blaming new clients and bigger deals. The way she looked at me changed, like she was studying a stranger. The warmth we had, shared for nearly 2 decades, faded, little by little, until it felt like I was living with someone who barely tolerated me. The kids felt it too. Quinlan asked why his mom always seemed angry. Brenna retreated into her room, spending hours drawing. Her artwork grew darker, smiling faces hiding fractured families. I convinced myself it was temporary. Stress, work pressure, a midlife phase. I told myself it would pass. I tried to fix it. I talked to Cordelia. I planned date nights. I fought to reconnect with the woman I had loved since I was a teenager. Nothing worked. If anything, my efforts only pushed her further away, more distant, more resentful, more cold. Then the divorce papers arrived. Not just a filing to end a marriage, but a coordinated strike against everything I believed I was. According to Cordelia's legal team, I wasn't just a failing husband, I was a liability. They painted me as a secret gambling addict drowning in debt, reckless with money, unstable, and unfit to raise my own children. They presented evidence that made no sense. Bank records showing withdrawals I had never authorized. Casino receipts bearing a signature that looked like mine but wasn't. Statements from supposed witnesses claiming I had borrowed large sums of money and disappeared without paying them back. Every accusation was a lie, every detail fabricated, and yet they had paperwork to support all of it. The courtroom felt unreal, like watching someone else's life being dismantled while I sat frozen in my chair. Lawyers spoke about me as if I were a criminal, a danger, a fraud. Cordelia sat just feet away, her face unreadable, refusing to meet my eyes. 18 years of marriage erased without hesitation. When the judge ruled in her favor, granting her the house, primary custody of the kids, and even control over shared business assets. I felt something inside my chest collapse, but what happened next hurt even more. Outside the courthouse, Cordelia approached me with a smile I had never seen before. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was calm, victorious. She leaned in close and whispered, "You'll never see Quinlan and Brina again. I'm moving them to Portland next month, and you don't have the money left to stop me." That was the moment I understood this wasn't just a marriage ending. This was deliberate, strategic, cruel in a way I couldn't yet comprehend. Within 6 weeks, my life was stripped down to nothing. The house was gone. My children were gone. Even my insurance license was revoked after the allegations of financial misconduct, despite there being no real proof. My career collapsed as quickly as my family had. With nowhere else to turn, I drove back to Ohio, to the house my mother had left behind when she passed away 2 years earlier. I packed what little remained of my life into the back of my Honda Civic and drove nearly 200 miles to a place I hadn't called home since I was 18. That's where this story truly begins. The drive from California to Ohio took 3 days. Every mile felt like moving backward through time. By the time I turned onto Maple Street in Akron, I felt like a ghost returning to a life that no longer belonged to him. The house looked exactly as it had the day of my mother's funeral, small, clean, frozen in time, a modest 1960s ranch-style home, the kind that once defined middle-class America when that still meant stability. White siding, black shutters, a narrow front porch with room for 2 chairs and a small table. That was where my mother used to sit every evening with her tea and a library book balanced on her knee. I stayed in the car longer than I should have, staring at the front door. This was supposed to be temporary, just a place to regroup, a stopgap while I figured out how to reclaim my life. But sitting there, I couldn't ignore the contrast. 3 months earlier, I'd been looking out over downtown Los Angeles from a hillside mansion. Now I was staring at Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes across the street. My mother, Wyfred Morrison, had lived in this house for 35 years. She bought it when I was 12, shortly after my father died, using his life insurance payout and what little savings they had. It wasn't a practical decision, it was a hopeful one. A single mother on a librarian's salary taking on a mortgage because she believed her son deserved a backyard and a room of his own. She was the strongest person I ever knew, though she never advertised it. She never remarried. Never dated, as far as I could tell. She poured everything she had into raising me and into her work at the downtown Akron Public Library, quietly holding our world together without ever asking for recognition. Every morning, my mother followed the same quiet routine. She'd make me breakfast, pack my lunch, and then walk the 6 blocks to work, her own lunch tucked into a brown paper bag. Every evening, she returned home carrying a stack of books, some for her job, some for her own enjoyment, and some she thought I might like. She had a gift for making a small life feel abundant. We didn't have money for big vacations, so she created adventures right at home. We'd pitch a tent in the backyard, lie beneath the stars, and she'd tell me stories about constellations while we shared hot chocolate from a thermos. When I became obsessed with model airplanes, she picked up extra shifts at the library to afford the kits. Then she'd sit with me at the kitchen table, helping paint the tiny details. Even though her eyesight wasn't great, she never complained. She just showed up. What stands out most when I think about her now is her calm certainty. She always knew exactly how much money we had, exactly when bills were due, and exactly what I needed, often before I realized it myself. For a woman widowed young and left to raise a child alone, she never seemed overwhelmed. She simply handled whatever came her way with a quiet competence that made me feel safe. I didn't fully understand that feeling until I became a parent myself. The strange thing was we always seemed to have just enough. Not abundance, but never desperation either. When I needed new school clothes, the money was there. When the car broke down, it got fixed. When I wanted to go to college, she somehow made that happen too. She never explained how she managed to save on a librarian's salary. I asked her once in my 20s, shortly after marrying Cordelia, when I was starting to understand how expensive life really was. "How did you do it?" I asked. "How did you give me everything I needed with what you earned?" She smiled that soft, knowing smile and said, "You find a way when someone depends on you. That's what parents do," now unlocking the front door and stepping into her house for the first time since her funeral. Her presence was everywhere. The familiar scent of lavender soap mixed with old books wrapped around me instantly. The furniture hadn't moved. Her reading glasses still rested on the end table beside her favorite chair. The last book she'd been reading, a mystery about a librarian solving crimes, lay open on the coffee table, a bookmark still holding her place. As I walked through the rooms I'd grown up in, the weight of everything I'd lost settled on me like a physical force. My children were 1,000 miles away, likely hearing terrible lies about their father. My wife had become someone I no longer recognized, filled with a bitterness I couldn't explain. My career was gone, my reputation shattered, my savings wiped out, but standing there, surrounded by my mother's books, her photographs, and the quiet dignity of the life she built for us, I made a decision. This house was the one thing Cordelia's lawyers couldn't touch. It belonged to me, free and clear, a final gift from a woman who had spent her entire adult life making sure I always had solid ground beneath my feet. I would fix it up, sell it, use every dollar to fight for my children. It felt like a plan, a good one. I had no idea that my mother had left me something far more valuable than a piece of property. The divorce process officially began 8 months after. Cordelia first said she needed space. I should have recognized the warning signs, but I was still holding on to the belief that we could fix things. I thought it was about our marriage, not something far more calculated. I'll never forget the morning the papers were served. I was getting ready for work, following the same routine I'd kept for 15 years. Coffee, shower, a quick goodbye kiss for Cordelia, even though she'd barely acknowledged me for months. At 7:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a process server stood there holding an envelope that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my life. The filing wasn't just asking for a divorce. It demanded everything: full custody of Quinlan and Brena, the house, my business interests, even my retirement accounts. But it was the accusations inside that made my blood run cold. According to the paperwork, I was described as a compulsive gambler who had been secretly piling up enormous debts. They accused me of stealing money from client escrow accounts to support an addiction. The picture they painted showed me as careless with finances, emotionally unstable, and even a potential threat to my own children. None of it was true. In my entire life, I might have bought a handful of lottery tickets. I had never walked into a casino, never played poker with friends, never placed a bet of any kind. I had built my insurance business on honesty and dependability. Every client account was spotless. Every dollar was tracked. Yet somehow Cordelia's lawyer had records that suggested otherwise. That evening, when I confronted her, she was methodically packing boxes in our bedroom. "Cordelia, what is this?" I asked, holding up the divorce papers, my hands trembling. "Gambling addiction, theft. You know this isn't true." She didn't stop folding her clothes. "I know what I've seen, Fletcher. The bank records don't lie." "What bank records?" I demanded. "Show them to me." That was when she finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes was unfamiliar. It wasn't anger or pain, it was cold, deliberate and unsettling, like I was standing in front of a stranger. "You're not the man I married," she said quietly. "Maybe you never were." The next 6 weeks passed in a fog of legal meetings, endless paperwork, and watching my life be analyzed by people who didn't know me. Cordelia's attorney, a polished woman named Patricia Voss, produced evidence that felt impossible to challenge: bank statements listing withdrawals I hadn't made, casino receipts bearing my signature from places I'd never visited, credit card charges linked to gambling websites I had never heard of. My own lawyer, Robert Chen, a solid, trustworthy guy who had handled my business contracts for years, kept rubbing his temples as we reviewed the files. "Fletcher, I have to ask," he said. "Is any of this true? If you've been hiding gambling debts, I need to know now so we can limit the damage." "Rob," I said, "I swear on my children's lives, I've never gambled more than a raffle ticket at a fundraiser. Someone is framing me. I just don't know how." But the evidence kept stacking up. There were sworn statements from people claiming I had borrowed money and never paid it back. A coworker insisted he'd seen me placing bets on my phone during lunch breaks. Even my neighbor Jerry Holbrook, someone I'd shared beers with dozens of times, signed an affidavit saying he'd watched me. become increasingly unstable and desperate over the past year. The hardest part was watching my children go through it all. Quinlan started pulling away, staying at friends' houses, giving me short answers whenever I tried to talk about basketball or school. Brenna still hugged me goodnight, but I could see the confusion in her eyes as she struggled to reconcile the father she knew with the man everyone claimed I was. The custody evaluation was degrading. A court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Martinez, spent 3 hours questioning me about my mental health, my parenting, and my finances. She was polite but distant, and it was clear she had already studied Cordelia's accusations before I ever stepped into her office. "Mr. Morrison," she said calmly, "addiction often comes with denial. Many gambling addicts become highly skilled at hiding their behavior, even from their families." "Doctor, I understand what you're saying," I told her, "but I'm not denying anything because I'm not an addict. I'm telling the truth." She nodded, wrote something down, and said she would include my comments in her evaluation. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday in November. That morning, I drove to the courthouse fully aware that I would likely lose my children. Still, a part of me held on to hope that somehow the truth would surface, that someone would recognize the manipulation behind it all. The courtroom felt lifeless and impersonal. Nothing like the dramatic scenes portrayed in films. Judge Patricia Winters, a woman in her 60s, presided from the bench. She looked like someone who had witnessed every possible version of a family falling apart and no longer found any of it shocking. Cordelia's attorney presented her case with flawless precision. Bank statements, sworn testimony, expert opinions on gambling addiction, and its effect on families, everything was laid out methodically. She described a man living a secret life, whose addiction had spiraled so far out of control that he resorted to stealing from clients and deceiving everyone around him. My attorney worked with what little we had, essentially my testimony, against stacks of documents. He pointed out contradictions in witness accounts, questioned the timing of certain transactions, and argued that the evidence was circumstantial and insufficient. It wasn't enough. Judge Winters granted Cordelia primary custody of the children, awarded her the house, and gave her control over most of our assets. I was allowed supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent upon completing a gambling, addiction treatment program and financial counseling. As we left the courthouse, Cordelia caught up to me in the parking lot. She was smiling, actually smiling when she spoke. "You'll never see Quinlan and Brenna again," she said. "I'm moving them to Portland next month, and you don't have the money left to stop me." That night I sat alone in my empty apartment, trying to understand how my life had become unrecognizable in less than a year. Moving back into my mother's house felt like stepping into a preserved memory. Everything was exactly as it had been 2 years earlier when she died. Her coffee mug still rested in the drying rack by the sink. Her reading glasses remained folded on the end table beside her favorite chair. Even her slippers were neatly placed next to her bed, as if she had simply stepped out and would return at any moment. For the first few weeks, I barely moved from the couch in the living room. Every morning I woke up hoping this was all a nightmare, that I'd open my eyes and be back in California, Cordelia beside me, the kids making noise as they got ready for school. But each morning, the water stain on my mother's ceiling came into view, and I was reminded that my old life was gone, likely for good. Depression settled on me like a heavy physical force. Some days, even basic tasks felt impossible. I couldn't bring myself to shower or make coffee. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Quinlan and Brenna, wondering what Cordelia was telling them, why their father had suddenly disappeared from their lives. Did they worry about me? Did they believe I had walked away? Had they accepted the stories about gambling and theft? After about a month of sinking into that darkness, something inside me finally broke. Maybe it was my mother's voice echoing in my head, reminding me that problems don't fix themselves by being ignored. Maybe it was pure instinct, the need to survive. Whatever the reason, I understood one thing clearly. If I had any chance of getting my children back, I needed money. And the only thing I had left was the house. The place needed work. My mother had done what she could to keep it up, but she was in her 70s when she passed, and time had taken its toll. The kitchen cabinets were worn, the bathroom outdated, and every room needed fresh paint. If I wanted to sell the house for enough to fund a legal fight, it had to look its best. I threw myself into the renovation with frantic determination. I stripped old wallpaper, sanded floors, and painted every wall. Working with my hands felt grounding after months of sitting in attorneys' offices feeling powerless. Every nail I drove, every surface I restored felt like a small act of resistance against the people who had tried to erase me. The basement was the final space I worked on. My mother had mostly used it for storage, and it was filled with decades of memories. Boxes of holiday decorations, stacks of photo albums, even elementary school projects she had saved for reasons I never understood. Sorting through her things was emotional but also comforting. It reminded me of who I was and where I came from, the values she had quietly passed on to me. That's when I noticed something odd near the furnace. The basement had a corner where the old oil furnace sat, converted to gas sometime in the 1990s but never relocated. Yet the concrete floor around it didn't match the rest of the basement. There were scratches that looked recent, and when I crouched down, I noticed dust patterns that felt wrong. It appeared as if the furnace had been moved not long ago. That made no sense. My mother had been gone for 2 years, and even before that, she'd been too frail to move anything heavy. The furnace must have weighed several hundred pounds. There was no way she could have shifted it, and no obvious reason she ever would have. But the signs were undeniable. Scrape marks in the concrete, disturbed dust, fresh scuffs on the metal casing itself. Something had happened there. I spent most of that afternoon figuring out how to move the furnace myself. Disconnecting the gas line terrified me, but I managed it. Using a furniture dolly and every bit of leverage I could find, I slowly shifted the furnace about 3 feet away from the wall. By the time I finished, my back was on fire, but I knew it was worth it. Behind the furnace, embedded into the concrete wall at about shoulder level, was a small safe I had never seen before. It was an old-style combination safe, roughly 18 inches square, painted the same dull gray as the basement wall to keep it hidden. The metal surface was worn smooth in places, as if it had been opened repeatedly over many years. There was no visible brand name or marking to hint at its origin or age. I stood there staring at it for at least 20 minutes, my thoughts spiraling. How long had it been there? Why had my mother never said a word about it? What could possibly be important enough to conceal behind a furnace? The dial showed numbers from 0 to 99, 10,000 possible combinations. Breaking into it could have taken forever. As I stood there, a memory surfaced. Every year on my birthday, March 15th, my mother called me at exactly 7:23 in the morning. Never earlier, never later, always 7:23. She told me it was the exact minute I was born, and she wanted to honor the precise moment I entered the world. March 15th, 1977, 03:15:77. My hands shook as I began turning the dial. Right to 03, left to 15, right again to 77. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then there was a soft click and the heavy door slowly swung open. What I saw inside shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The safe was deeper than it appeared, packed tightly with its contents. The first thing that caught my eye was cash. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands, some aged and yellowed, others crisp and untouched. I pulled them out with trembling hands, counting again and again. The total came to exactly $847,000. Beneath the money were documents, several driver's licenses, all bearing my mother's photograph but different names. Isabella Reyes from New Mexico, Maria Santos from Arizona, Catherine Walsh from Nevada. The photos showed her at various ages, but it was unmistakably her, the quiet librarian who raised me. Though in these images her eyes looked sharper, more alert, almost guarded. There were matching social security cards, birth certificates, and even a passport issued to Isabella Reyes in 1988. Everything appeared legitimate, not crude fakes, but official documents. My mother, Wilfred Morrison, had apparently lived under multiple identities for decades. At the bottom of the safe lay a sealed envelope with my name, written across it in my mother's neat, familiar handwriting. Not an alias, just my name, Fletcher, the same script I'd seen on birthday cards and handwritten lists my entire life. I dropped heavily onto the basement floor and tore the envelope open. Inside were 3 pages written by my mother. The very first line made the blood drain from my body. "My dearest Fletcher, if you are reading this, they have finally found you, and I am no longer here to protect you. The letter went on to dismantle everything I believed about my past. Your real name is Fletcher Castellano. Your father did not die in a car accident when you were 12. His name was Vincent Castellano, and he was murdered by the Torino crime family in Chicago on September 18, 1989. I had witnessed his murder because I was supposed to die with him. Instead, I ran. I took you and I ran. 3 months later, I testified against the men who killed your father before a federal grand jury. I had to stop reading for a moment. My hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the paper. Vincent Castellano, not Vincent Morrison, a construction worker who supposedly died in a car accident, but Vincent Castellano, murdered by the mob. My mother hadn't just been a widow scraping by. She had been a federal witness. The letter went on. We entered the witness protection program in January 1990, became Wilfred Morrison. You became Fletcher Morrison. We moved to Akron, Ohio to start fresh. The government gave us new identities, a modest settlement to help establish our new lives, and the guarantee that we would be safe as long as we never contacted anyone from our previous life or revealed our true identities. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The way my mother always seemed to have just enough money despite her librarian salary. Her insistence on never discussing life before Ohio. The lessons she drilled into me: never trust strangers too easily. Never give away personal details, always be alert. I had thought she was just protective. She had been keeping us alive. The money in the safe was the remainder of our government settlement, along with the savings I had accumulated over the years by living cautiously. But Fletcher, the letter continued, there is something else you need to know. Something I discovered too late to warn you properly. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hired private investigators to monitor you in California starting 3 years ago. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I heard whispers that people were asking questions about the Castellano family again. What they found broke my heart. Your wife, Cordelia, has been working with individuals who have been searching for us for decades. They found you first and used her to get close to you. The room began to spin. Cordelia, my high school sweetheart, the mother of my children, the woman I had loved for 20 years, had been connected to the people who killed my father. I didn't know if she fully understood the scope of her involvement, or if she had been manipulated just as they had tried to manipulate me. But the divorce, the fabricated evidence about gambling, all of it was intended to destroy me financially and emotionally, leaving me with no choice but to return to Ohio. They had forced me back to the one place where they knew my mother might have left something that could lead them to other witnesses or evidence from the original case. I felt like I was going to be sick. Every awful thing that had happened in the past year, losing my house, my children, my reputation, had been orchestrated by people hunting my family for over 30 years. But my mother hadn't just left me money and the truth. She had left me a way to fight back. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number. Call Marshal Theodore Vance of the U.S. Marshal Service. He had been waiting for this call since the day I died. Tell him you are Vincent Castellano's son, and tell him you are ready to finish what we started. The phone number was written in red ink and underlined 3 times. Beneath it, my mother had added one last note. She apologized for never telling me the truth while she was alive. She said she wanted me to have a normal life, a chance to be happy without constantly watching my back, but she had always known this moment might come. She reminded me that I was stronger than I realized, that I came from a family that never retreated from a fight, even when the odds were stacked against them. She told me my father would be proud of the man I had become and that she was proud too. She urged me to use the money carefully, to get my children back, and to remember that sometimes the worst moments in life guide you exactly where you're meant to be. I sat on the cold basement floor for nearly an hour, staring at the letter and trying to understand what it all meant. My entire life had been built on a lie, but not a lie meant to weaken me. It was the kind meant to protect me until I was strong enough to face the truth. When I finally stood up, I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Marshal Theodore Vance. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting beside the phone for decades. "Vance," he said. "This is Fletcher Morrison," I replied, my voice unsteady. "But I think my real name is Fletcher Castellano." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a slow, controlled breath. "Son," he said quietly, "I've been waiting for this call since the day your mother passed. Where are you right now?" "I'm at my mother's house in Akron," I said. "I'm sitting next to an open safe she left behind. Don't touch anything else. Don't speak to anyone. And do not leave that house," he ordered. "I'll be there in 4 hours." Marshall Vance was a tall, gray-haired man in his early 60s who looked like someone who had witnessed every form of human cruelty and never fully grown numb to it. He arrived with 2 federal agents, and for 6 hours they examined everything my mother had hidden, photographing, documents, logging evidence, and asking detailed questions about my life in California. "Your mother was one of the bravest people I ever worked with," Vance told me around midnight as we sat at her kitchen table. "She knew they'd eventually come looking for you, so she planned for this day. The money, the safe, the combination tied to your birthday. Even the private investigators watching you in California. She wanted you to uncover all of this exactly when you needed it." What I learned next was even darker than I had imagined. The Torino crime family had spent decades tracking down witnesses from my father's murder trial. But over time, they had evolved. Instead of killing outright, which drew too much federal attention, they learned how to dismantle lives quietly. They targeted the people closest to their marks, corrupting them, then using them to cause financial collapse and emotional devastation. "They've been working on you for at least 5 years, Vance explained. "They found Cordelia through her real estate connections. People, who knew the right kind of criminals. They had been patient, calculated, and relentless. They likely approached Cordelia first as ordinary clients. Everything probably started as legitimate business before slowly shifting into something far more dangerous. The private investigators my mother had hired hadn't just been watching, they had been building their own case the entire time. They collected audio recordings of Cordelia meeting with individuals tied to the Torino organization. They tracked money transfers, uncovered forged documents, and documented payments made to people willing to lie about me. The gambling addiction narrative, the fabricated bank records, every single accusation had been carefully manufactured. Marshall Vance told me they had used this exact strategy on 6 other protected witnesses. Over the past 15 years, create legal and financial destruction, erase credibility, then wait for the target to retreat to familiar ground. What the Torino family didn't anticipate was my mother dying of natural causes 2 years earlier. Her death automatically activated internal protocols within the U.S. Marshals Service. They had quietly placed the Ohio property under observation, waiting to see if anyone would come searching for what she left behind. "We've had eyes on this neighborhood for 2 years, Marshall Vance admitted. "Once we realized they were pushing you back here, we knew it was only a matter of time. Anyone showing unusual interest in this address has been documented." The most stunning development came the following morning. Cordelia was arrested at her Portland hotel at 6 a.m., along with 3 men who had been tailing her. She had believed they were private investigators, helping her strengthen her divorce case. She didn't learn they were tied to organized crime until federal agents sat her down and explained everything during questioning. "She's agreed to cooperate," Marshall Vance told me over coffee. "In many ways, she's a victim too. They convinced her you were hiding gambling debts and affairs. They showed her falsified proof, stirred fear and resentment, then positioned themselves as protectors offering to secure the kids and her financial future. The hardest conversation of my life was calling Quinlan and Brenna. They were staying with Cordelia's sister in Portland, confused, frightened, and unaware of why their mother had been arrested. "Dad?" Quinlan said when he answered. His voice sounded small, fragile, nothing like the confident teenager I remembered. I told him I knew everything felt overwhelming, but I needed him to trust that things would be okay. I told him his mother and I both loved them, and none of this was their fault. When Brenna took the phone, she asked quietly, "Are you really a gambling addict?" She said her mom told her I had stolen money and that was why they had to move. I told her gently that I had never gambled and never stolen anything. I explained that dangerous people had lied to hurt our family and that the police had stopped them. I promised her we'd be together again soon. It took 6 long months to untangle everything in court. The evidence gathered by my mother's investigators combined with Cordelia's testimony in the federal case against the Torino organization, fully cleared my name. The gambling records were proven to be fabricated. The paid witnesses withdrew their statements. My insurance license was restored, along with a formal apology from the state board. Cordelia and I will never rebuild what we once had. Too much damage had been done, too many lies, too much betrayal. But we're working together now to help our children understand the truth. She's in therapy, confronting the guilt of being manipulated into destroying her own family. I'm in therapy learning how to trust again. What matters most is that we have our children back. The Ohio house sold for enough to buy a modest place in California and establish college funds for both kids. Quinlan returned to his basketball team, and his coach says several colleges are still interested despite the chaos of his junior year. Brina's artwork has grown brighter, more color, more hope, though she still draws families that look like they've weathered heavy storms. I think about my mother every single day, about the sacrifice she made to give me a normal childhood, about the bravery it took to testify against murderers and then spend 35 years constantly watching her back. She saved my life twice, once when I was 12, and again when I was 47, and I never got the chance to thank her for either. The Torino case goes to trial next year, and I'll be taking the stand, just like my mother did decades ago. But this time I won't be running afterward. This time we finish what she started. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you're meant to be. My mother understood that, and even from beyond the grave, she found a way to protect her son. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment about a time someone in your family protected you in ways you didn't understand until later. And if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the people who love us most are fighting battles we never see.